I've been playing a lot of Ys. A lot of Ys. Probably more Ys than most people should reasonably play. A great gaming philosopher once described this situation, something about the definition of insanity. Pretty sure a hostage got shot, That's all a bit too complicated for me. I prefer to keep it simple. With Ys, I can count the pixels, and I like that, even if I keep seeing the same spaces they're illustrating in a million different inconsequential ways. But I think that's where that ancient gaming philosopher was wrong. I think sometimes you have to scrape the edges of insanity to find anything worth talking about. Ys 2 might look like a non-subject, and that's an understandable reaction. It's quite literally cut from the same cloth. It looks the same. It controls the same. By all visual accounts, it is the same. They packaged them together now, and that started all the way back in '91. But they are not the same. Before Ys 1 launched, series co-creators Masaya Hashimoto and Tomoyoshi Miyazaki originally intended the first two numbered entries to be a single, unified experience, which is why development discussion here will be relatively thin. Due to a mixture of hardware limitations and development constraints, the two planned entries were separated into two distinct games, with Ys 1 launching in 1987 for the PC-88 and Ys 2 following 10 months later. The dev staff is almost identical, and they handled all the groundwork well in advance. Which might lead you to think of Ys 2 as a glorified expansion, but that's not quite right either. Playing through, they're entirely different games, in ways that boggle the mind. It's actively in conversation with its roots, and by in conversation, I mean standing in direct opposition. You're no longer free to roam. On average, it runs about twice as long as the original. You spend significantly more time grinding. The final boss is not a joke. The importance of bump combat, the game's foundational mechanical signature, is diminished.
Well, you can't do that. That's illegal, right?
Speaking purely from a design perspective, Ys 1 is tight and forward-flowing. Ys 2 is a 5-car pileup. And that doesn't make the game bad or unfun or whatever. It's just weird. Let's all point and laugh at the weird. You know, a part of the challenge in covering Ys 2 is figuring out what it means, like as a video game, not just as a series of plot events, but how its systems and mechanics communicate and what they're saying. It's really easy to be cynical and incurious and say that Ys 2 is simply a sequel for its own sake, or that its contents were lopped off the back half of the full vision and sold separately. But it's pretty clear when playing through that they wanted to give players something different, in the same duology, in the same matched set. A proper ending, but beyond a pixelated placard. It's a little frustrating looking for developer interviews about Ys 1 and 2 specifically. A lot of information comes from blogs, developers recollecting events with some degree of haziness. Most information concerns the original. It was a short development period and quite literally from another time, another world. Apparently, dev staff liked to joke that Tomoyoshi Miyazaki was influenced heavily by 1986's Castle in the Sky, even though they're pretty obviously different. Though Ys 2 grew popular in part because of Lilia, a character added on request by a different staff member, Seigo Oketani, who was, quote, a fan of pale, sickly heroines. And it paid off massively because Lilia became incredibly popular from her fully animated portrait. In a way, her image is Ys 2. Allegedly, the maps of Ys 2 were influenced by Metal Gear of all games. Maybe the first game's experimental and loose map design paled in comparison to Outer Heaven. It's hard to say exactly what this means, but Ys 2 is much more rigidly constructed regardless. It's a lot for a game that was birthed by a little subversive development, a whole action RPG sensation because a programmer thought Azteca 3 would kind of suck. I talked a little about fandom mythology in the first video, but it's also a broader symptom of interested people looking back at old games to attribute brilliance and intentionality and genius to games and their developers when, being realistic, games are the result of many elements designed by many people working in relative disharmony. That includes clashing creative visions, material cut for the sake of the deadline, chaos. Sometimes pressure leads to a diamond, and sometimes it results in a hunk. A big ol' hunk of game. which is basically how I feel about Ys 2. See, I waxed poetic about the importance of bump combat previously. Dragon Slayer and Xanadu were the progenitors, and Ys, as a series of systems, is derived from what they established. Ys responds to Xanadu by caring about ease of access, kindness, above all else. Bump combat is critical. It's the system they kept. So when the developers actively undermined that system in their second Ys outing, the mythology is dispelled. It was treated as disposable, all the way back in 1988. I can talk about the first game's pacing, but when they inflate the sequel big and round, in clear and intentional ways, any pretensions of craft dissipate. This was made into a slog on purpose, or the first game was an accident. It's hard to be cruel, though. The dev team was young, and they were still pushing their boundaries, trying to shape the identity of something that rapidly caught fire. How do you rein that in while simultaneously stoking the flame? How do you give people more of what they want and keep it under control? And most importantly, how do you close the book? This is Ys 2 and the end. Ys 2 puts us back in the driver's seat of the only man with a top speed of 40 miles per hour, the apex predator, the sultan of speed, Adol Kristen. The original Ys pulled a generational fast one by naming the game after a place and never taking us there. Oh, you want to see Ys? That'll be $60. After whooping darkfax's ass, if you haven't seen the first vid, that's your cue. By the way, after vaporizing darkfax, the books of Ys send Adol hurtling into the sky, which, for the bad guys, you have to assume felt like the Saiyans landing on Earth. Whoa, shit! I think I broke everything. You're rescued by a young girl named Lilia and brought to her village, which is full of completely regular people. Ys 2 is interesting. Not for doing anything exceptional, but for instantly diffusing its own fantasy. You have to remember, Ys isn't some ethereal place, but a part of the continent that suddenly floated into the sky hundreds of years ago. Of course, it looks like this. It's not heaven. The lower key locations of the original game hinted at magic and mystery, an ancient civilization. It's like uncovering the secrets of Atlantis. And when you get there, everything's normal and people are named like Fred. I was led to believe there would be secrets to uncover? These are peasants. Adol faces a threat unlike any other. Holy fuck, the KKK! The intro cutscene shows a cloaked figure talking to an orb, so we know shadowy forces, presumably more powerful than darkfax, are conspiring against us. But for now, it's Hicktown. Not long into my journey, I noticed that something was very wrong. Like the game was warning me somehow.
Oh, that's bad. Oh, that's real bad.
The villagers live in fear of the monsters who rule over the land from Solomon's Shrine. But there are more pressing matters at hand. Lilia is sick, and the town's doctor is missing. Adol sets out into the nearby ruins to cure his rescuer and maybe learn a thing or two about Ys. It's a suitably small introduction. You may have just killed the shittest guy you've never heard of, evil information himself, but that trip really threw Adol for a loop, knocking him all the way back to level 1. And that's perfectly understandable. Bro is tired. He just blazed through the first game, got locked in Darm Tower, and had to fight the strongest mage in the land. It broke the sound barrier. The times were simpler then, and there were no labor laws, so it was back to the mines for Adol. This is where I'd like to put a long-winded monologue about all the weird introductory segments of Ys 2 and how different port developers handled it differently, but I can't. I can't dazzle and delight you with a series of microscopic differences because almost every version of Ys 2 is, per the locations you visit and tasks you perform, completely uniform. Why the video runtime? You'll see. Playing the game through once will not equip you to beat the game in Japanese. Solomon's Shrine exists and it hates you. But you don't need a checklist or any special reference, you just complete the same events in order. I have to wonder what prompted this phenomenon in the original game. You want to assume development constraints, a timeline weirdness, but the Famicom version added to the core experience. You want to assume free-range creative license, but it's practically a non-factor in the sequel. When I tell you that you need the pickaxe found in the mine to free the doctor, and that he needs a nut from the ruins and a herb from under the boss room, that never changes. It's an incredibly tight vision for a game that could honestly do with some work, because Ys 2 found itself in a sudden design conundrum. How do you onboard newcomers, and should you even bother? Most people who owned a PC-88 played Ys at some point, and if not there, then elsewhere. It's fairly safe to assume that a direct sequel isn't going to grow the market share or whatever gross term. It's a game effectively made for people who played the original. There's suddenly no real need to account for whether people have played Ys. They probably have. You should still onboard people, it's best practices. Adul's level 1. You can't transfer levels between games and only keep them in the weird, consolidated versions of Ys 1 and 2. And so we get the Ruins. A tight, walled single floor that acts both as a tutorial room and a condensed version of the game. You move fast. Monsters do too. And sometimes you fight more than one at a time. You're just slightly constrained by the environment, so you have to lock in. If you make it through, you'll have learned Ys. And when you dive deeper into the dungeon below, you'll find a reason to return here before continuing your descent. It's a straight shot, but riddled with minor bouts of backtracking. To be clear, there is no overworld here. From the very first step out of the village, Ys 2 distinguishes itself from the original. There's no real sense of broader area, and you're not given a chance to explore, poke around, find golden vases and rivers. You don't get to wonder about the larger world. And it's a small thing, but one of the natural consequences of splitting the games. If the first two titles did end up as a big single game, you'd never talk about a lack of overworld, because it was there, just back on the ground. And geez, I'm at the place. I found Ys. I don't need to wander aimlessly, let's get on task. But it creates an environment that's more immediately hostile to newcomers and deliberately plot-focused. If you're new to Ys, picking up the sequel for whatever reason, you're learning about bump combat the way the first game's first dungeon teaches it, with cramped spaces and approaching enemies. It means you never stumble onto side quests or small moments, because the vision is crystalline. You're not free to travel to dungeons you're underleveled for, and you're not free to experiment with the combat in wide open spaces. There's never any real downtime out in the field. You don't always have an easily accessible escape route. You're forced to learn the game within the confines of the ruins, and pretty quickly, because you'll rapidly outpace this single floor for experience gains and be forced into the mines. It's a linear series of tasks, and this makes sense. The villains are more dangerous, the situation is more perilous. Adol has to rise to his foretold hero status, so he does. The world physically bends to make it happen. The only thing lending any kind of interactivity to the world now is the occasional item pickup. You can find a rota nut by scouring the ruins. You find a handful of other items like this throughout the game. It's a small thing, but at the very least demonstrates some kind of progress. A reminder that this is a game from '88, and even the original title didn't have contextual floor pickups. It's old, it's primitive, and playing them back now is interesting if only because we get to watch a fish grow legs.
Yes, this is the show where we get hyped about contextual floor pickups.
Once you've gained a couple of levels and hopefully picked up some equipment, you'll find yourself in the Ristini mines. Almost. Ys 2 is unfortunate. I think that's a good way to put it, and I have a hard time recommending the game earnestly. In the original, in the worst cases, players would sometimes run into bosses they couldn't damage, and be forced to grind up a level or two on that exact floor before running it back and fighting like normal. Level gating existed, but it only ever became an issue 2 or 3 times over the course of the game. The funny thing about Ys 2, you're cleared to handle Moondoria ruins, but take that tunnel to the mines, skip the enemies, fight the first guy you see. Yeah, no damage.
This is 2 screens away from the ruins. You ever get so angry you want to scream until you can't?
So you're forced to grind the enemies in the tunnel to actually damage the enemies in the mine. No big deal, take a few minutes and good. We're back on track. Go to fight the first boss.
Oh, it's because you need to use magic. Let's run it back!
Ys 2 is gated so thoroughly that regardless of how well you know the game, the steps taken to progress, you're still forced to grind it out. Zone over zone. It never lets up. It never gets better. And it's just a matter of numbers. There's no outskilling this. You can't hurt the boss at all until you reach the minimum level requirement. The easiest enemies to kill, that is, the ones under your level, give less experience. The ones at or above your level give good experience, but are harder to kill. This This is fucking stupid. It's not about intentionally killing every enemy you find to skip grinding. It's not about mastering the mechanics or even buying the right gear. You must stop and kill for upwards of 30 minutes in the worst cases. Nearly every single version of the game is like this. Why would they do this? Are they stupid? In Ys 1, when you were damage gated, 9 times out of 10 it's because of a boss. Here, it can be regular old enemies. Let's stop for a second. We're on the first major leg of the journey, the intro. In a single dungeon, we've seen 2 of the original game's core design conceits challenged, actively refuted. Game is not cropped and quick, it's grindy and precise and controlled. Yes, relatively speaking, bump combat is fun and fresh and fast. People didn't worry too much about this stuff because more Ys, but you have to play Ys 2 the way they want you to play without exceptions. And that's a damn shame. And yet it's totally appropriate for the scenario. We gotta stop the demons. It's just that the spirit of the original game is altered because of it. Something that presumably wouldn't have happened in a big combined launch with a 10-hour runtime and a pile of floppies. And that's the cost of doing business. You're also forced to fight in increasingly confined spaces. The ruins aren't nearly as dangerous as the mines. Plenty of enemies, sure, but the space is still basically open. The mines have chunky monsters, demons with lots of health. They deal tons of damage, and they're all tucked away in these awkward, tiny screens. Why am I always fighting in an arena shaped like a Cheeto-encrusted artery or a kidney stone? You're made to catch up to the game's expectations real quick. And even if you're mechanically savvy, you've still got to grind. It's a surprisingly frustrating experience. It doesn't really set a sterling tone for the rest of the game. And then you find it. Deep in the mines is a treasure chest, fire magic, which you bring back to an old man in the ruins for a stick. If you're high enough level to kill the nearby golems, you'll get an MP bar, which gives Adol a simple projectile. Magic is both the savior and the death of OG Ys design. It really is that extreme. This is a game that marketed itself with fast, fun combat. The bump system is a true original and doesn't really live on in modern games. It's a worthy mechanic and something we should have seen iterated on here, but instead, it's shoved to the side. You don't need to stress about being in a tight corridor anymore because you can just shoot a fireball. You don't need to worry about incoming enemies and adjusting yourself to aggressively defend. You can just shoot a fireball. The foundation of bump combat? Sanded away. Grinding made easy. You got a projectile. Bosses?
Like, imagine you're tired playing Ninja Gaiden, you don't want to combo anymore, so you press a button and Ryu pulls out a gun and fucking...
You'd think that little magic bar would be a hindrance, but no. No, not really. You lose magic at such a slow rate, it's obscene. They want you using it. And it's entirely by design. See, they also made most bosses immune to melee, immune to bump combat, the mechanical core of Ys, and you can't have a boss die in a couple of measly fireballs. Adol needs to be able to shoot a lot of them or he needs to recover it quickly. But hold on, magic doesn't recover by standing still like health, which health doesn't recover like that very often anyway because the overworld is effectively gone. Whatever, so it would have to be recovery items, which do exist, some versions, except you can only carry one item into battle, as you may recall, with no access to the menu otherwise, in most versions of the game. So Adol gets to hurl a lot of fireballs. He isn't making use of his swordsmanship or skill for the bulk of the game, but waving a stick and roasting demons with the flames of hell. It almost fits. It's a mythical environment and we've moved far beyond the steady-state world. Adol should be allowed a few special hero moves. It's just that the implementation effectively paves over the entire mechanical identity of the original, the roots it was built on, and any hope for an original and interesting play experience. How are you going to sand off the mechanical cruft of an Ys game? What the hell? You can, of course, opt out of fireballs in regular play, but you won't. When the grind runs long and enemies hit hard and stack up, you'll be there, fireballing like everyone else. Thankfully, Fireball isn't the only spell. There's 6 of them. Light magic is useful for revealing hidden doors. You use it here in the basement of Rastini Mine, and one more time later. Light magic, mostly used here. One time later. Good, I'm glad. Return magic is fast travel and it's crucial, mostly for replenishing your magic if you're low. They probably recognized that it was weird having to delve into and run out of the first 2 dungeons in the original game, forgetting to buy a fast travel item, and handed you the ability to zap yourself around the map. And the world is built more like a snake than a hub, so you need the ability to warp around to the various towns, at least if you ever want to revisit an old area. That and the final dungeon here demands multiple trips in and out playing grab-ass with a whole host of characters, so here we are. Altar magic is the type of thing that makes me suddenly aware of why so many of my followers play Ys. I see, but more importantly, it turns you into a monster, which makes all enemy demons non-hostile, so you can turn off combat for as long as you have a magic bar. Just opt out. If you ever need to traverse a space and avoid combat, it's like super stealth. Realistically, you use it in a few key locations and avoid it otherwise because experience gains are critical for any kind of timely run. The last 2 spells don't see much use. Time magic is neat, it's a reusable mirror from the first game. Everyone freezes and you're free to chop them up. But in the versions where it's really good, bump combat is already better. Fun cheaty tip for the modern version, you can just hold diagonal at any enemy and win any combat without actually correctly bumping them. Shield magic nullifies all damage and rapidly drains magic on hit. It's useful for the final boss because you get it so late it has no other purpose. You unlock these spells at different points in the game and we'll revisit them later where it matters. The mines are also interesting for having a number of side objectives. Yes, they're designed just complexly enough to get a directionless slob lost for all eternity, so for some people the scavenger hunt will be a special kind of hell, but at least Ys 2 gets intentional about its spaces. You're made to find a pickaxe to free the town's doctor from some rubble. You get the staff that forces you topside to gain the power of magic. Talking to the doctor, you'll find that you need both the rhoda nut you picked up earlier and a special blossom to heal Lilia, so you plunge back down into the mine, which is where you find the hilariously underserved light magic and a hunk of ore which you'll sell to the shopkeep for an expanded equipment selection. And this is all pretty neat. In the first game, you had to wait for a seemingly arbitrary trigger to unlock access to the level 3 sword. Here, you're unlocking access yourself and being rewarded for it. The blurred edges of a modern RPG grind into focus. You'll also find yourself healing Lilia, winning the affection of the girl, her mother, the townsfolk writ large. Ys 1 didn't feel like this. You blew in and blew out. And while you did benefit Zepik Village directly, it's because you found their silver bells and, deposited a woman. You know, the townsfolk are, really into that kind of thing. There's a greater sense of entanglement here. Rescuing the doctor, healing Lilia, resting at her house instead of some inn, selling the ore. Man, you clear out this dude's basement because it's full of tunneling monsters. He isn't even important, he just has a shitty house. It's significantly more intimate on the whole. This room is actually a grinding area, surprisingly. See, they knew. They knew what they did. But you can't access it without the evil bell found in the mine, so it's only really used as a bridge between the mines and the following zone. Go and watch any long play of Ys 2. Everyone stops here and farms experience because you're not only gonna need it, you also need better gear. Gold trickles in slowly, it's not like the older game. Items feel legitimately expensive, and while it confers a sense of weight and value to any given purchase, it also means you'll end up skipping whole swaths of gear, scraping by with whatever you can, until you absolutely need a new sword or a damage reduction. And it's very weird. You were practically swimming in gold before, but that's mostly because the game handed you one of the best shields in the very first dungeon, and their matching set pieces in the second. Here, it's a fight to keep up, and it's part of why the game runs longer. Not only are you forced to grind to deal any damage, you're forced to grind to deal competitive damage. A whole nother vector of grinding. Now, the mines also act as a receptacle for the Books of Ys, collected in the last game, to hear some ancient wisdom from a manifestation of the 6 priests of Ys. Problem is, you only found 5 while clearing out the mine. The 6th is here, tucked away under this dude's house, which is why you're forced to kill a bunch of monsters until you can safely pass through, read some lore, and get the green light to pass into Noltia Ice Ridge. It's a much more involved introduction than the original game, and you can see the value for a specific kind of player. Basically the kind of person who's using video games as an island vacation, okay? Like relaxation time. But I got a lot of things going on, so in one sense, even if I find it kind of generically repulsive, Ys 2 is far more aspirational than its forebear. Again, Unlike the previous game, you have to unlock the ability to move forward. No wandering off to die in the mountains unsupervised. Please use the buckling mechanism to fasten your seatbelt. You'd think that'd make you ready for noltia, especially if you did a bunch of grinding. But the really funny thing about this game is... Oh, you see, grinding is actually a developer-intended player gating mechanism to smooth over lack of skill. And now my game is more annoying. This is why that basement is actually a grinding location. You're not just gated from bosses, but even progressing through this stage without reaching the appropriate level. Well, if there's one thing kids love, it's studying, filling out forms, filing their taxes. The first time I encountered this puzzle, I thought I needed an item or to combine something, like find a way to increase the power of my fireball. But what you actually need is 1 or 2 more levels to suddenly burn the ice away like it's nothing. Man, it's already fire. What are you talking about? There aren't even any obviously good grinding locations outside of this basement. It's actually better to go back to town and incinerate weaker enemies en masse than praying the game actually hands you enough. And remember, this is early Ys. Even if you're playing a version with plentiful enemies, and you might not be, you're still gonna have to find them. Thankfully, we have return magic so we can make our way back to the grinding room. And I'm not even bitter about it. For legal reasons, I have to indicate that the grinding in this game, regardless of my theatrics, is not that bad. Any given run takes about 6 hours. It's just that I played it 7 times. Combine the bizarre gating with the pinched hallway combat and the slopes you can't climb without another key item, and noltia is probably where most players who actually pulled through the mine quit straight out. Nothing about Ys 2 flows freely or easily. It absolutely does not capture the spirit of adventure that's so key to the Ys series, played straight anyway. It's a game about showing up exactly where you have to and killing time by practicing. Ys 2 is school, or a day job. Man. Oh, here's a fun thing. In case you manage to level up enough, use a key item in a specific place to make an ice bridge, burn through the blocks, and actually approach the boss room. Well, you're actually not done with the zone because you need a special mirror, so go hunting for that. By the way, where's the heal ring? Okay, this one's great. If you don't poke around in every possible corner, or use a guide, you're not finding this room. It's tucked to the right of a stairwell. Same place in every version, and usually impossible to distinguish from any other wall in the region. And for the kicker, light magic doesn't reveal it either. Probably would have made a good use case. Do you understand how smooth Ys 1 was? I'm not crazy, okay? This is insane! Now, presumably it's because you don't technically need this item. You could just warp away back home and rest up anytime you dip sufficiently low. And presumably it was hidden here because you were given free heals from the 6 priests in the mines, meaning you could grind without making a trip back to town. And you got the sense through play that the priests mattered, even if it was a small thing. By noltia, you're officially on your own, and while you can warp back home, you need to stop and wait to avoid any obnoxious load screens. Unfortunately, you heal at what seems like a slightly slower rate than before, so I can only stamp my feet and throw a tantrum privately because nobody's coming to give me that time back. Noltia isn't worthless, though. Early Ys is built around finding key items to unlock the way forward, so much so that people will discuss whether it's a Metroidvania, to which I say, stop. Please stop. Stop it right yesterday. The key item fixation makes it plain that Ys is still about going on an adventure, rooting around in the world, uncovering secrets, and making use of more than brute strength to achieve your goals. We may have lost the open world, but the heart of adventure still beats under all that snow. And noltia's design is also worth considering. The thin, cliff-jutting mesas actually challenge the player not to abuse fire magic where possible, because it's rare you can actually get enough hits in to make it inarguably optimal. Because of the bizarre construction, like the depths of the mine, it's usually faster to handle enemies manually. Don't worry though, that changes going forward. Noltia is a bit of a speed bump. Both of the middle areas are. Following a boss fight, we wander into burnedbless, which more or less how I feel about Ys 2. Burnedbless begins with an ominous message that you're being watched. The only time the player needed to lure something out involved the evil bell, so they'll probably figure it's important here. Doing so in most versions of the game will summon a small group of roos, and if you didn't already piece it together when you found the altar magic in Noltia, you'll have an excuse to transform and speak to them. In most versions of the game, this step is completely optional. They don't offer much but text, except in the modern versions where they have a little hideaway you can warp to and heal up for free. You can spot the rotoleaf they'll tell you about just beyond this screen, which you equip to survive toxic gas. They're extraneous, but maybe why I remember the zone more fondly than Noltia. We just came out of a cold, visually barren zone that was relatively small, but demanded a ton of needless back and forth to grind to find items, retreading old ground to the point of nausea. But burnedbless solves a lot of that monotony with these cute creatures, the roos. Easily traversed spaces, a whole town with a small mystery, an amount of retreading that manages to feel like progression with context. When you enter the town, nobody wants to talk to Adol. They'll tell him to get out. If you transform into a Roo, though, their leader will mistake you for the demons who are working against Adol, and the guy will spill some info about his son Tarf, who they've jailed somewhere in the area. This small but interesting twist of events sets you on track to find Tarf, eventually finding the Black Pearl, which you hand to Tarf's faceless cellmate, and he manages to free the pair with some magic. So again, you're doing heroic things, using your wits, equipping item with button to interface with object me gamer me brain to uncover the game's mysteries. It feels like a proper adventure, even when you have to grind a bit. And this leg of the adventure is only heightened in the modern versions, where you're made to escort Tarf the way you escorted Fina previously, shaking up the fast, forward-moving flow for a defensive, frantic walk back. I later found out you can acquire an achievement for cornering him. Guys, what are we doing here? What is this? I know XC did the whole "remember when games weren't for pussies" bit, like, this isn't even funny, man. This is deranged. Regardless, burnedbless wraps up after a quick boss fight, but it's also worth looking at its general construction. Unlike Noltia, the zone has wide open rooms that occasionally pinch, but you're usually free to fight in the open. Otherwise, you get these horizontal screens that don't give you much wiggle room. Both are ample opportunity to abuse fire magic, which in most versions will continue to sail across the screen, burning anything it can, knocking monsters back, and burning again in perpetuity. You're given a combat break sheerly through the design, and maybe it's intentional. We're not exactly pushing the limits of bump combat here. You're incentivized to check out. It's true that burnedbless has a greater sense of adventure, if only because of the zone's inbuilt quirks, so it's possible they wanted to ease the strain caused by Noltia to put focus on the quest. Escaping the underground, Adol finally blows into Ramia Village, a clifftop haven for more entirely normal people pushed up directly against the demon's home base. Of course, we're only at the midway point. We are halfway through the sequel to Ys. Ys 2 had a lot to live up to, and I think it stumbled in a lot of small ways, but it's obvious they were pushing the boundaries. And what boundary needs pushing more than Darm Tower? They really saw the first game, looked down at the paper and said, what if there were like a super Darm Tower? What if Darm Tower were evil and fucked up? Solomon Shrine accounts for half the runtime of Ys 2, in a game that's twice as long as the first. It's a sprawling, multi-level complex that, depending on the version, is more or less annoying to interface with, but regardless, you're spending most of your time here. You can't even get in without altar magic, but that's only a mild annoyance. The minute you step in, you'll realize, this isn't Darm Tower. You don't have to climb a ridiculous, overly samey high-rise. It's a fully realized space that almost feels like a plausible building, an actual dungeon, a place people used to live. Okay, sure, it's sparse and underserved. We need so much more in terms of decorations and relics, but sure, the demons are tasteless swine. Fair enough. But it's loaded with enemies, and you learn pretty quick that it's also incredibly directionless. You do a lot of roaming, killing, meandering before realizing you need a guide, or by grace of the goddesses, stumbling onto the next step to completion. Take the layout, for example. You enter into a central hub that branches to the left or the right. There's nothing to do in the left for now, and the only building on this screen has an impassable door. You eventually figure out you need to go right, wandering through doors, until you finally find a place to once again use altar magic to get a pass card to move into the next screen north, and continue. This is how Solomon Shrine progresses. You fumble around like a flailing idiot until you're finally in the right place at the right time to advance. In modern versions, you're made to use alter magic in this northern screen and equip the whisper earrings Tarf's dad gave you earlier to get a password to open up the left wing. You actually use alter magic pretty extensively in Solomon's Shrine, at least by comparison to the rest of the game. You can't enter without it. It's an acknowledgement that Adol may be powerful, may be the strongest warrior in the land, but against a whole demon-infested temple, needs to make use of subversive tactics and cunning to succeed. In the smallest way, Ys 2 reflavors Adol as intelligent or discerning, or even opposed to unnecessary demon killing. Okay, so let's retract that one. Spilling into the left wing, you'll meet Dallas. He doesn't even fight you, just stares menacingly. You can't hurt him, so you're left to leave or walk on by. If you do, he'll turn you into a demon, usually a dark roux of some kind, but sometimes into a pile of walking feces, unable to change yourself back and unable to communicate with humans. You're actually able to use magic and access bump combat in this form, something the regular roux can't do, but it's still a full halt on progress until you cure yourself. The problem is, nothing will cure you. You need to continue exploring this left wing until you find an empty room. There, and only there, you can use the light magic, for the second time in the game, to reveal a treasure chest with a sacred cup. Back in Ramia, a guy who casually has a well of holy water in his basement will intuit that you want some water, as long as you bring him the cup. You're immediately zapped back like nothing happened and continue as normal. I love imagining that some kid got permanently stuck here and never finished Ys. It's unlikely, as such a popular series was probably widely talked about in a way that modern video games kind of aren't. You know, nowadays we get people digging in the files and producing perfect information about games. Analog reality dictated that people ask other real people for oral assistance. You don't have to rewrite oral assistance. Yeah, go to like the upper left, but to get there you have to find a door. I forget where in the place, but there's a door that'll take you up that way. At least the room looks a little weird most of the time. Ah yes, time to access a skill I forgot I had. You might argue this hiccup only exists to make an NPC, one without a body, by the way. He's literally just a portrait, relevant to the quest. I don't know. I don't really get down like that, but you do you. You might argue it exists to make light magic relevant. That's a terrible reason. Of course, it really exists to make Dallas seem like a villain. A real villain, not like some idiot who pops up and dies from a few stiff whacks. It's something Ys struggled with. Most of the villainy in the first game was dark fact acting in the background, and a handful of maybe sentient demons. They weren't really villainous, just bigger monsters, so killing them didn't really follow an arc or have any pathos, except like raw, blinding fury, but ignore that. Ys 2 needs opposition. It's the conclusion of a two-game battle against a horde of demons, so Dallas fills the role in the place of his master, the actual final boss. It's typical arrogance. They're well aware of your existence when you land on Ys. They have the opportunity to kill you, but they don't. They make it a game. It's funny to them that some lone idiot swordsman is running around killing everything. Let's see how far mankind's savior gets. Hubris works well enough as a critical character flaw in these creatures. They legitimately only want to cause suffering and pain. It's part of what fuels their power. You can't make someone suffer by killing them outright. It's not much, but it's something. These idiots would rather toy with Adol than take him seriously. Like he didn't kill 10,000 demons and vaporize dark fact. With our curse cured, we're let back loose in Solomon's Shrine. When Dallas turns you into a roux, you might have wandered around the canal a while and found a hideout for runaway citizens, previously captured by the demons. They won't speak to Adol unless he's a human, and now that he is, we find Lilia again.
Is that really you, Adol? I never thought I'd see you again. Do you recognize me? I am Lilia from Rance Village.
It is really hard to communicate how much swag this was. Exactly, in 91. She left home to follow her crush before getting captured. She's mostly here to hand us a key. Dallas immediately turns the runaways to stone. More reason to kill Dallas. The shrine is mostly that, key item hunts. Lilia's key opens a number of previously locked doors throughout the dungeon. We find a silver pendant, eventually a gold pendant later on. We kill a boss and use one of the pendants to warp to a previously unvisited area. Wandering through a second section of the canal, we meet the most important character, the unrevealed man who was locked up with Tarf in Burnedbless. Keith Fact! Okay. Of every English name ever written, you picked Keith. Keith Fact.
Keith Fact is a man-turned-demon, and he helps you throughout the dungeon. Narratively, anyway, really he does about as much as Dogi. Eventually, we drain the canal and enter the final relevant sector of the shrine. This walkway branches to the goddess's terrace and a sacrificial tower. You can heal up for free with the help of Rhea and Fina. I wonder how many players reacted to the goddess thing. Playing only the original, but unfortunately playing its many versions, it was impossible to go in unspoiled if you watch intros and have eyes. Not that it's some incredible plot point, but now there's even less to wonder about. Rhea and Fina stand out, sure, but no more than Adol or Dogi, at least visually. There's an old quote from a blog where one of the developers said players would have questions for 2 about Rhea's identity, but as far as I understood, there was no question. She was obviously different, obviously Fina's twin, and both had angel wings in the intro. Why did they choose to sand away even the smallest mysteries when adapting the game? Eventually, you'll have to climb the other tower. It's guarded by a boss. Keith says we have to rush the tower before the bell tolls 5 times or a sacrifice will be made. Well, hopefully they make allowances for grinding because I cannot physically harm the gate guard yet.
Get out of here now, or you will perish like the others.
Man, please. I am very experienced.
We storm the tower and reach the top, only for Dallas to ring the bell a 5th time, apparently killing Maria and leaving us feeling like we've wasted time again. East 2 is interesting because a lot of these wasteful moments have narrative value. We're meant to take a hit. You can't wage war with a demon lord and win every battle, right? So standing at the top of the tower feels frustrating, but it's also the point of the segment. On one hand, it's once again inflating its own runtime because now we'll have to fetch another key item, bring it to the goddesses, return to this spot, and cure the petrified runaways. But on the other, the demons are quite literally farming human misery. At least in the anime, it's made clear that they need humans to suffer, or that their sacrifices need to be stuffed with regrets, hatred, all of that fun stuff. And seeing the developers of this messy little PC-88 game toy around with narrative is probably why it managed to connect with audiences of the time. Yes, it's an old game, and yes, it's designed in arguably questionable ways, but there's a degree of intentionality, trying to give this sudden fanbase something resembling the epic conclusion everyone was waiting on. Of course, for all that waxing poetic, you're still made to warp back to Ramia, talk to Tarf and ask for the Black Pearl, find out he lost it, talk to Gordo the gate guard, who mentions he saw someone pick something up off the ground, maybe a gumball, who knows, and wander back to the demon's meeting room, which, have fun guessing that without a guide, bucko, so you can head back to the goddesses and have them insert the pearl into an idol you found in the tower to finally cure the petrified humans. Hashimoto man, I thought you were designing for kindness. And don't mistake this for some twisted brand of kindness-minded design. This is not helping you grind any faster. At this point, you fought 2 bosses in Solomon Shrine who both require a good fat chunk of grinding and quality equipment to take down with anything resembling ease. This is not helping you get prepped for Dallas because you're gonna have to grind there too. This exists to keep you looped in with the people, with plot-relevant characters, and make it plain that Adol isn't purely relying on his own strength, but also the contributions of other interested humans.
No! That's... What?
It doesn't convey itself as well here as in the anime, where the populace of East is so mortified, so ignorant and propagandized and fearful that they actively hunt Adol for spreading heresy. And so any radical resistance to the demons is heroic by design. You know, with that level of context, these few active interested people seem like warriors, but in the much more mellow reality of East 2, the game, they just feel like weird idiots who happen to be gating progression. And that's not just the characters, failing to pass the vibe check on a personal level. The developers of the game have talked about how none of these descendants of the 6 priests of East were planned. They were just named during the intro segment of development. You may have run into a lone statue in the canal, and if you return, you'll find Sada, the son of Ramia Village's elder. He'll ask about a woman named Maria, the girl who was sacrificed. With nothing left to fight for, he'll hand you his sword, the Claria sword. This effectively greenlights the hunt for Claria equipment, the stuff you needed to kill Dark Fact. The entire segment from here on consists of a back and forth between Ramia and the shrine, hunting for anything and everything you can. There are a lot of extra items just tucked away in the shrine. There's an upgraded shield, there's a full set of battle equipment, the final set originally found in Darm Tower. There's time magic, which is only marginally useful. There's an idol that alters how fire magic works, an enhanced version of another idol you found earlier in the game. They probably wanted to make the shrine feel like this unbelievable superstructure, and it does. I didn't even grab half of the missable items in half of the playthroughs because they're extraneous. You don't need better fire magic to kill the final bosses. You don't need the battle set, like at all. They're there to make investment feel rewarded, provide some kind of collector's benefit to interested players. The village elder will hand you the Claria armor for finding his son, but you're still missing the shield. The next boss is Dallas, but you need a gold pendant to reach him at all. When you do finally break his door down, you'll find he's nullified your magic. This moment is legitimately critical to the game, so a quick recap of the bosses leading up to Dallas. The first boss is unlike anything seen in East previously. You have to use magic. In fact, that's true of every boss except the final two here. He doesn't ask you to run, he wants you to stay in lockstep, carefully walking between his huge swath of bolts to fire off a quick few rounds when you can. It's training the player to be a calm and collected marksman more than a fighter. Focus your energy. The noltia boss is a simple run and quick draw battle. He jumps, becomes invulnerable in the air, and lands, firing off a huge spread of icicles. You have to shoot him and swerve away or you're taking damage. The fight's about the same basic principles as the first, but in a different context. Both require you to move, to wait, and to time your strikes. By the way, every boss in the game, minus the last, can be walked away from. Yeah, they left the door open and you can just give up without turning off the console. It's actually kind of ingenious, or necessary. Maybe they figured frustrated players would bounce if they couldn't have a fair fight. It is kind of ludicrous to deal 0 damage with a clean hit, so they kept the player keyed in, gave him an out. It's also just funny because
Face me!
No, I don't want to. The third boss is incredibly frustrating if you don't slow down and understand how his body and his tongue work in tandem to box you in. It's kind of like the worm boss from 1, but with a giant fat head to dodge as well. Again, it's more about timing and positioning than anything like Ys. Fireballs aren't exactly hard to fire off, so they make the challenge more about moving. Design-wise, it's almost like the original, but you never really get in and put them down yourself. It's disconnected and personal. There are benefits to this change, by the way. In 1, and especially by the end, some bosses felt untouchable. I'm not great at video games, but occasionally I see someone who isn't much of a gamer play them and realize exactly how much I'm taking for granted. How easy it is for me to line up a headshot on a deer at 50 paces in Red Dead Redemption 2 with dual analog controls. Ys 1 may have been designed with kindness in mind, but some of those bosses required a level of dexterity average players might not have, especially the Mantis, who shreds health like nothing. The trick is, Ys 2 divides the skills necessary to fight its bosses. The bosses of Ys 2 aren't definitively easier, but they separate movement and offense into 2 separate skills instead of the same one. You don't need to worry about whether you struck the bat weird and accidentally ate 50% of your life total. You know you're safe if you duck the projectile and can attack with impunity. There is kindness in these fights, even if it's just basic readability. The fourth boss is all about weaving between impossibly tight projectiles and shooting. It's not really aspirational. Thing's basically a more mobile version of the first boss. In fact, Falcom considered it so plain, so outright annoying, they replaced it in the modern versions of the game. Now it's a huge spider that has a similarly obnoxious projectile but also lays eggs. Suddenly you can use bump combat, for the first time in an Ys 2 boss fight. It's a side objective, of course. Clearing the eggs makes the fight easier, but only if you're able to dodge the little energy balls first, which takes the challenge up a notch. You're asked to pay attention to multiple threats and deal with them accordingly. It's a solid change. I straight up forgot what this boss was until I sat down to write about the game. One of those times remakes actually accomplish something. Zava here isn't overly challenging. You actually ignore her throughout the fight and focus on her projectiles. She spits them out until her health is sufficiently wiped, and then you're free to light her up. It's a really frantic battle that, again, prioritizes mobility and precision over bumps. It makes me wonder if the dev staff thought bump combat was just too easy, or too swingy, or too unclear for bosses. One of those play realities that shocked me in the first game was blowing up early bosses I was over-prepared for, but the game quickly leveled that out at level 10. And Darm Towers fights were much more consistently threatening because of it. Here, we're not given the opportunity to flex our power or even use our core skill set, and it's bizarre. With these bosses out of the way, we're left only with Dallas and the final boss. Dallas is interesting because you're finally allowed to use bump combat again to win a fight. It's strictly controlled, you can only land a hit or two before he warps away, and you're always at risk of burning, made to juke between fireballs to do any damage, but this boss is the first actually Ys-appropriate fight of the game. I guess it makes sense. They probably didn't want to give people more of the exact same thing, maybe wanted to push the vision however they could. Making the same thing twice isn't fun. Believe me, I've done it, but the consequence is a game that doesn't really feel anything like its predecessor. And it's the direct sequel. Zelda to Zelda 2 type shit. Oh, you did that too, that's right. And anyway, once you see Dallas like this, you'll never stop wanting to beat him to death with your bare hands.
This is the power of 3 tubs of brain force.
The final stretch has you delve into the core of Ys, where magic pulses through the stone itself. It's almost organic, and it's the most magical part of the game because of it. Most of the able-bodied, plot-relevant characters show up. Tarf's here, Keith Fact is here, we even got Gordo, man. Damn, but what's that? A shadowy figure? Darting in the darkness? Just around the corner? What are you doing? Why are you here? When this happened, I thought Lilia was about to be possessed by the final boss or something, like, maybe the big bad was using transformation magic, but no. They just did a weird, bad dramatic beat that entirely diffuses itself in seconds. What's even weirder is how they preserved it going forward in every version of the game. Guys, this does not qualify as drama. We approach the inevitable conclusion and find the twin goddesses. The final boss, Darm, threatens us directly, but with the help of some old friends, we manage to beat him back with the power of the harmonica. Check this shit out. Finally, we're free to fight Darm.
He looks like that one cat.
So, that was your tower. Yes, you see it was constructed to... Yeah, I don't care about all that. I ran that tower. So many... Darm is the epic conclusion, the final battle, and he comes packing heat. Blazing colors, meteor showers, and a big dude in a cloak. Make no mistake, without solid prep work, Darm is the shittest guy you've never heard of. In most versions of the game, you're getting smoked if you dare to underlevel, which means you need to do a fair bit of grinding before taking him on. You also need the Clarius set to really stand a chance, especially if you're underleveled. Now, the player is given a lot of extra tools. Players might recall that the old man in Lance Village sells a life-giving potion for 60,000 gold, more than anyone would have until the end of the game. If you have the money, you can equip the potion to protect yourself once from death, which in most cases is mandatory because Darm doesn't screw around. You'll also have access to shield magic, which makes you invulnerable until your MP bar drains, and that's a solid second line of defense. If you choose to forego the potion, you can equip the ring, which in, I think, most versions of the game slows the meteors down to half speed. You might think, okay, why would they bother with all these extras? Is making sure players beat the game that important? But they're really not crutches. They're numerically mandatory. People can say Dark Fact is hard, but I have to reiterate, the fight is easy in most versions of the game, and only really challenging in the Steam version because frame rate weirdness on modern PCs turns him into a bullet hell. Darm is consistently challenging in every version of the game because without the life potion, you're probably gonna die. You're gonna watch your MP bar dip to nothing and run out of shield magic. Those meteors come hard and fast, it doesn't matter which port you're on. The only surefire defense is to grind to the moon, level up like crazy, which will massively decrease his power and increase your playtime from 6 hours to 8. Depends on your mood, I guess. It's just another one of the original game's strengths. A hard cap of 10 meant you didn't even think about level grinding after the first hour, maybe hour and a half.
You spent half the game at max level. Here, you're constantly required to stop and do the requisite application filing, aka monster slaying, to even approach.
Man, come on, you gotta try a little harder.
Ys 2 was received well as a highly anticipated sequel, but it's really hard to play today, especially fresh off multiple runs of the first, and see it with genuine charitability. It's definitely doing its own thing, but it's almost impossible to call those new priorities better. It wants to establish Ys as more than a sleek, action-packed game, though, hence the greater focus on Adol as more than a swordsman and the noticeable attention to stamping Ys's people in frame. We're given an assembled cast of characters, everyone who came together to make the journey possible, and even see Adol speak with Fina one last time before leaving. She has a duty and he's hungry for adventure. They part ways there. But you're not getting off that easy. While the ports of Ys 1 are more drastically different, the ports of Ys 2 still exist in their own internal lineage and have specific points of interest worth bringing to this specific table. I want to spend some extra time on the ports because while they're mostly on board with the core experience, some of them are worth paying attention to. If you remember Famicom Ys, prepare to be disappointed. 2 here isn't nearly as bizarre or ambitious as its forebear. That first game had totally unique areas, side objectives. It reimagined the map extensively. There was an inexplicable pond fairy. Things were happening. At the very least, the sequel lays its own tiles, a little bit. The problem is, Ys 2 doesn't have an overworld with dungeons strewn throughout, so there's significantly less incentive for any overly handsy map designer to screw around. You need to hit the ruins and the mines. You always go to Ice Place followed by Fireplace. Yes, they could have changed things up, but they didn't. I don't think they were getting paid for conceptual work in the first place. The ruins might be the weirdest place in the game, with an altered layout and a totally unnecessary forested section that's a pain to walk through. A lot of Famicom design decisions, especially in the case of ports, revolve around hardware limitations. It was a home console and too many drawn objects would cause performance issues, so fewer monsters, slower speeds in the first, reworked bosses, etc. Like the first Famicom Ys, the sequel has very few enemies spawning at any time, which leads to a lot of relatively lifeless areas and a more frustrating grind in some specific zones, though the actual XP received seems higher. It manages to feel less obnoxious overall. I imagine loading times on actual hardware might make it just as frustrating, but emulated it's perfectly playable. Maybe the weirdest thing about Famicom Ys 2 is that it directly responds to the original game's quote-unquote mistakes. You don't need to get close to the edge of the screen to drag it forward. The camera is mostly centered on Adol, making it much more safe, especially in large, tightly walled areas. That means you don't do any guesswork moving forward in dangerous zones. You don't need to remain on constant alert. You can play normally. And Adol moves real fast this time, much faster than the original game. It's almost disappointing because in fixing the port's obnoxious elements actually loses a degree of craft, sands away its own imperfections, its character. It's a little bit less of itself, which is still fine and playable. It just helps make Ys 1 look that much cooler. The real treasures of Ys all happened before we ever hit the place itself. And it's the core combat, the general play, that actually loses here. Ys is a fairly fast game, and bump combat can be punishing if handled poorly. The good news is, in most of the games, bumping any enemy that's too strong for you, or bumping badly, will give you a buffer to recover and fix your mistake. Famicom Ys was punishing, but slow-moving enough that you could handle yourself if you were paying attention. But the increase in speed means you have a harder time physically repositioning with confidence. It's a fairly stiff system, and you're made to tippy-tap that D-pad up to address it and finish an enemy off. It's all a little unwieldy. And if you get fishing for an advantage, something to make this faster-than-expected combat stomachable, you'll realize you can run Adol into a wall while an enemy is approaching to stunlock whoever gets caught and chop him to death. He turns into a wood chipper. Where before the mechanical stiffness led to more strategic, real-time bumps, here it leads to the player deliberately over-leveling to ram through enemies regardless of proper positioning, or abusing the wall run tactic to clear whole rooms, grind anyone down, win a fight you're losing.
Japan was pretty historically ahead mechanically in regards to game dev, but during this period of growth, when information wasn't massively disseminated, when the action game as we know it was only then emerging, the unintended consequences of small changes could reflavor whole experiences. If this weren't the grinder game, this stuff wouldn't matter. But it is. So you abuse mechanics where possible. The fantasy evaporates. Even small things like the palettes alter expectations here. The original was more uniform, at least because of the overworld being an enormous landmass. You'd find the weird palettes in dungeons, in pockets of the map. And even then, Darm Tower accessed dark colors. Now, everything's bright, lit from corner to corner. Once you're out of the mine, which uses pretty garish colors already, you hit noltia, and it is glowing compared to most of the first. Burnedbless is dark at the edges, but blinding everywhere else. Even the shrine, the big bad demon dungeon, is practically bathed in the light of the goddesses. This is legitimately challenging to look at for hours. It's so unbelievably bright, and don't get me started on the final boss. Why would you do this to unsuspecting kids? This has to be an epilepsy warning, at least a saturation warning. Man, tone it down, please. I love how bright and fun the colors are. It's easily the most visually striking of the lot. It's also just really interested in crispy eyeballs. And like before, the bosses are so different to account for the Famicom's limited hardware. The first boss is a blob by comparison, not nearly as apocalyptic and threatening, and it translates into his fireballs. This dude would have made you sweat in the first Famicom-ese, but now you can zip around with impunity. Wait for the right moment and light him up. It's less challenging than the modern versions, even. And this pattern continues on. The second boss is a fragment of what he's normally like as long as you use your superior speed to kite him around the edges, which goes triple for the third boss. It's more about avoiding his enormous hitbox than his projectiles, and if I may remind you, the first game's bosses were much more intentionally frustrating. In fact, nearly every single boss is a shell of its PC-88 version, with fewer projectiles and low mechanical intensity. It's only the final bosses, Dallas and Darm, that actually pose a real challenge. Dallas doesn't function like his contemporaries. He lets fireballs bounce off the walls like little dark facts, and spawns them in as they disappear after hitting the player. This fight is genuinely more challenging than the other versions, which usually require you to slip in under his floating fireballs and take a couple cracks. Darm is a neon grunge nightmare, so that's no good. But his meteors also spawn in at awkward times in awkward places, and it's just about as annoying as any version of the fight. He's not predictable like Dark Fact, and that makes him so much harder by comparison. Famicom Ys 2 is fun to look at, some of the time. I just can't recommend it over any other version of the game. Still neat for a point of historical comparison, but the edges are fraying.
The two Famicom ports are pretty different, so what happens when you combine Ys 1 and 2, ship them in the same package as the same game?
The TurboGrafx version came packaged as a complete duology, like the eventual Ys Complete among others. Like I mentioned in the first video, it's a modernized remake, at least relative to the era, meaning it looks more well-rounded visually, it handles a fair bit smoother, and exists as an opportunity to alter, let's say, problematic elements of the original release. But they didn't. It's deeply faithful to the source material, aiming mainly to upgrade the aesthetics, which is why some characters have voice dialogue.
I am Deca. I know exactly who you are. You have a great reputation which precedes you, Adolf.
And some even get a face, which makes for a more visually pleasing playthrough, at least. The real question of worth comes down to what was preserved and what was changed. The PC-88 version, most of the oldest ones really, are punishing. Being able to save anywhere is a blessing, but you're still forced to wrangle a stiff set of controls and demanding boss fights. The TurboGrafx port maintains the core, but since it's looser, in the hand anyway, it's much easier to pick up and progress. Though the choice of colors might make it harder to notice fruits and things. But overall, it's a better vibe. Remakes can be frustrating in games where mechanics are concerned because fundamentally altering the identity can have unintended consequences on the play. Good gameplay is often like good audio. Not everyone notices exactly why something feels, quote, clunky, or lack the vocabulary to adequately explain those things, hence clunky. But when it's weird or frustrating, you can tell.
The PC-88 version has solid bump combat. It functions at a level most games of the era just weren't able to hang with, but it still feels needlessly amorphous, odd at times, and it's something fixed by the TurboGrafx port. When you hit an enemy badly, you get no reward. When you bump an enemy imperfectly, you get a small buffer to position better, but you have to then work for it with quick inputs. When you cleanly strike, you get a big buffer, and so you don't stress in combat. The result is something that doesn't feel overly different from the original or other versions of the game, but ends up more rewarding moment by moment, battle by battle. You can tangibly feel your own mastery expressed through the feedback you receive in combat. If only this were Ys 1 instead of 2, where fireballs reign supreme. It's a more appealing run in a lot of ways, preserving the general vibe without shunting players into the PC-88 minds. I mean, that shit's not even in English. I just played Ys 2 so many times I knew what to do. It's a thoroughly international solution. And I don't want to give the impression that everything is easier here. Remember, the bosses are like an introduction to shmups, or bullet hell games, and some of these guys demand brutal precision, or you're eating dirt. And it isn't universal. Some of them are flat easy, others will make you tear your hair out, especially flashing back to other versions of the fights. I'm sorry, I had to move how to get through unscathed? And that's mainly a result of the bosses suddenly moving in real time instead of, slowly flipping around, PC-88 style. But again, a remake has to be weighed for what it preserves. And what it preserves is the grinding. It's actually pretty interesting. This port specifically has a combined leveling system, meaning you can carry over your levels from 1 into 2. Playing through TurboGrafx Ys 1, you don't often run into grinding issues, or at least notable ones, as often as other games, because by Darm Tower, you're about where you need to be and it becomes difficult to scrounge up any more levels. It's also unnecessary because the game isn't nearly as thoroughly gated as 2. Bosses are mostly manageable. Here, you need to hit a minimum level to even damage the bosses, like we know, but the combined system doesn't actually meaningfully account for Ys 2's endgame, and you'll be thrown into the deep end regardless and be forced to kill wave after wave of demons to access the divine right to deal a hit point. Now, grinding is not the end of the world, I should make that clear, and in a game where it's already reduced, sure, whatever. But I'm starting to understand why Adol was so pissed off in the anime, aside from all the other reasons. Just get the hell out of my way! And it's still a perfectly playable game, and easily one of the most interesting, if only to see all the unique assets they created. Seeing Fina and Lilia and Dallas animated and talking, it's more distinctly human because of these additions in a way that Falcom increasingly catered to as its games rose in popularity. In some pretty clear ways, it's a more complete expression of what Ys wants to be. Though it wasn't handled directly by Falcom, that's certainly how people reacted at the time, with one outlet unironically comparing its story to an epic fantasy novel, which is maybe the most insulting thing I've seen written about books all year. But maybe you'd overreact too if you were an adult in 1991 who cared a lot about games and were watching them evolve before your eyes. It's among the most well-received TurboGrafx games for a reason. These tiny details, nothing compared to what we have now, seemed surreal, even if Lilia's voice is getting drowned out by the pounding music.
I finally found it. The last time I saw you, you vanished before I knew it was happening.
It's okay, sweetie. Don't strain yourself. I don't want to understate how valuable these things were. Lilia's animated face, the introductory cutscene. These were opulent and obvious markers of high quality in a video game from this era. They cleared most of the competition at the time. They looked like the future. So it's not a surprise when the remakes key into these things. Given sufficient context, style is substance. The eventual Falcom-directed Sega Saturn release, contained in the Falcom Legacy Collection, Volume 2, Japan only, is important if only as an indicator of how Falcom wanted their old games to look and feel. It's a quaint game, nothing as colorful as the others, but it's done with intention. Ys is supposed to feel mystical, ethereal, or at least more could be done with the presentation to communicate it. So we get pallid, withering hues occasionally accented by something else, a magic, a demon. Adol himself, the most colorful place in the game is Burnedbless, which actually stands out in the lineup of zones for having any visual flair. Like before, characters have beautifully drawn portraits to highlight the humanity of the world. In a sense, Ys is less about the places, but the people, or at least that's what the visuals are communicating.
It came packaged with a full, opulent intro cutscene to succinctly explain the first game's events. They weren't packaged together, so it's basically mandatory for a direct sequel, and it has the same effect as the other aesthetic considerations, putting focus on the people. Which is at least a little weird because while the characters do matter, like in the lore, they don't do a whole lot, or anything really interesting. Sure, we chase Lilia throughout the game because she's somehow always getting into mortal peril. We help free a little kid in burnedbless. Noltia doesn't even have a plot character. By Ramia Village, and eventually the Shrine, we'll suddenly be juggling Gordo, Keith Fact, and even characters from the previous game, but these people are typically more of a hindrance than anything. Gordo blocking the path to the Shrine, rescuing Tarf and Keith early on, Lilia in general. You're the only real hero on screen. I think you're meant to care about these personalities, but if anything, I'm disappointed that the bloodline of the priests got so diluted by useless tits. How is it that only the Fact family can serve cunt?
Oh, this guy? That's Keith. Keith Fact. Wood.
You can see the modern aspirations underpinning the core mechanics. Adol moves fast, and bump combat is almost slippery. You'll tear into a guy, they'll change directions, you'll instantly turn and bump them again. It's loose and tight in a way that's impossible to describe, but creates needless anxiety at times. But since we're playing Ys 2, we can just throw fireballs and pave over any weirdness. No worries. I'm mostly impressed that nobody thought up a more interesting way to handle progression. You go through 6 tiers of equipment in Ys 2, and at no point does the equipment trump raw levels in terms of importance, except with Darm where you need levels and the silver equipment. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate a hero who can make better use of his own skills than the best gear. I just don't want to kill any more enemies. I have had enough. One of the biggest disappointments out of every version of Ys 2 is the DS version. I'm sorry, okay, I went a little too hard in the previous video. On reflection, I think it's at least a little bit neat that they added an unnecessary segment to a game that already flowed forward pretty effortlessly. And it's not like tap combat erased bump combat, it just trivialized it completely by being the dominant, most easily accessible option. But at least tapping allowed players to then combo by bumping into a struck enemy for a couple of free hits. It's weird, but it's not evil. Ys 2 follows the modern version almost perfectly, and it's almost sad. I was sitting there waiting for the game to sprout a weird, completely invented dungeon, a new boss, literally anything to break up the monotony, but it never came. The sad reality of Ys 2 and clinging to its identity and becoming so uniform is losing the disparate visions other people contributed. There are no secrets or mysteries to uncover in the land of Ys 2. It's barren, a dead end for discovery. The only real comparison is the modern ports because it's built on their bones, but altered for the system's peculiarities. Some enemies happen to be gigantic, but that doesn't really change anything about the combat. Not really.
Except actually, the big enormous enemies only appear in Ys 1. In Ys 2, all the regular enemies are actually of uniform size. Just every single layer of uniqueness peeled away. Why?
You're already likely not using the touchpad controls and relying on defensive, aggressive taps into bump combos. They roll over like any other enemy. Size doesn't matter. This title doesn't have darkness at any point. We don't get to see the developers remove it to make it easier. It's basically the same as any other game, it's just a little off. The little map makes traversing a number of dungeons easier, and specifically the Shrine, but it's hardly a reason to pick this port over any other, especially because it's a general downgrade built on the same foundation as the most widely accessible version. Ys 2 Chronicles is the version most people will ever play, and especially going forward. It's available on multiple consoles, it's available on PC. It's probably been weird listening to this video if your only exposure to Ys 2 is the Chronicles version because it changes just enough to stand apart from the pack. Like before, nothing is technically wrong with this port. If anything, it bespeaks exactly how Falcom wants people to look at the game. Mellow palettes, friendly faces, and the loudest visual element dead center. It's a remake built on remakes, built on remakes. Remakes must be evaluated for what they keep and what they discard. Chronicles keeps just about everything, every area, every weird extraneous item pickup, and every confusing, wait, what do I do now? Moment. Except sometimes you get more direction. It maintains the grind, it keeps the level gating, it's faithful to a fault. If anything, the devs were more concerned with combat than the other elements. Chronicles combat is cool. It's a solid compromise between the intense speed and liquidity of the Saturn version and the general clunk of the oldest versions. When you hit someone, you feel it. You bump them, visibly. When you get hit, you lose the chance to press the attack, but you have time to reposition. When you hit, you're incentivized to keep the pressure up. It's probably the ultimate version of the system and part of what makes the first Ys Chronicles so solid. But this is Ys 2, the magic game. Chronicles recognizes why fire magic is bad for combat, the game's identity. If you just torched anything that moved, if you were incentivized to do so by a grindy, level-gated game and innately higher risk in melee range, you'd have a game that actively devalued its own core feature. And so Chronicles makes fire magic worse. Deliberately. Not completely awful, not worthless, but it removes fire magic's ability to strike multiple times. It can't carry enemies across the screen anymore, bumping them and burning them on every tile. Instead, it hits once. You can charge it up for a slightly larger blast. Even at its strongest, fire magic isn't nearly as busted out of the box as it is in earlier games, making the Chronicles version of Ys 2 arguably the best version, or at least the most respectful of its own mechanical identity. And by the time you absolutely for sure need to grind to kill Darm, you'll probably have access to the idol that turns fire magic into this. Not bad, right? Still powerful, but powerful in context. It would have been nice to reinterrogate the entire level-up system, no level-gated bosses anymore, that kind of thing. Beyond combat, Ys 2 Chronicles and the older remakes it's based on all feature an expanded RPG aspect. If this is Ys, if the game and its world are more than some rundown backwaters and nameless NPCs, the world needs to be fleshed out. And they did just that. Every NPC has a name. Every NPC has a unique relationship meter that Adol can influence. You can give items to these people to make them like you. Some of them hand you healing items. I gave Bro some garbage, and he gave me a big meat. Who knew kindness paid off, actually? Well, you can't slash them into pieces and become a villain. Adol just isn't that kind of person. You can burn them with fire magic, and you're gonna want to burn their crops and torch their children. Actually torch their children, because each character has unique burning dialogue. Wow, talk about attention to detail. They even stuffed them with fourth wall breaks and cryptic references. Wow, cool Goonies NES reference. I sure am feeling 40 years old today. Between characters feeling more like people and all the portraits, the general focus on personalities, names, Ys 2 Chronicles feels much more in line with Falcom's modern RPGs, even if it's still ancient and piecemeal by comparison. There's an acknowledgement of both the company's strengths and Ys 2's own strengths in this small gesture. Of course, most of the achievements lead the player to act like a sociopath, so I don't know. Maybe modern remakes were a mistake. This is the first time Adol's even been capable of villainy, maybe minus cornering Fina in the first game, but that's also a weird, creepy achievement jammed in for, well, I'm sure somebody had a good reason. I am absolutely sure of that. It's not like I expect optional chivos to align with canon, but it's one of those weird alternate versions of Ys created by port differences. You could play through the whole series without seeing Adol as anything other than a golden retriever, but here you can burn people. Of course, none of these are even half as interesting as the last feature here. Ys 2 Special is a 1992 remake of Ys 2, The Final Chapter. It came into being because Korean company Mantra acquired the rights to bring Ys 2 to IBM computers. If only Falcom knew what that actually entailed. It's a fully Korean game and has no English translation. You need a guide to pull through. Or Korean. If you're in my line of work, you get a lot of guff from tech purists and people who can't tolerate even the most mild and harmless form of civil disobedience, like preservation, for example, who'll tell you that pirating old video games is ontologically evil, to which I say, I hope you import this one day and play it on original hardware. I would really enjoy watching someone like that realize how unstable the game is, even on original hardware. The thing just crashes. Apparently, it even crashes on DOSBox for some folks, though I only ever had one freeze, and I'd preemptively made a save state because the online walkthrough warned me to. It's just a little unsure of itself, okay? Give it some space. Falcom likely did not realize the extent to which Ys 2 Special would depart from the core experience. It isn't just a remake, but a full reimagining. The same characters appear, and a whole host of new ones. There's dwarves in the game.
Ooh, unforchies. Looks like Reddit just told you that you committed blackface. Oh my god.
There's elves in the game. East 2 Special is basically Fantasyland with all its tropes and trappings. It's also completely fucking absurd. Sure, the core plot events are basically intact. You're still found by Lilia, you still heal her illness, you still need transformation magic to get into Solomon Shrine, and Dallas still turns you into a demon, which you recover from with sacred water. It does hit the notes. It's just easily 3 times longer.
I mean, how bad could it be?
Or at least, that's how it felt. You zip along the screen, you mash a button to attack. Maybe the worst kind of mechanical crime in a bump system. And you kill more creatures than currently inhabit the Earth. I was teed up to hate this game. I like to talk about identity in games. It's why I'm kind of leery about Ys, Nintendo DS Ys, for example, because it doesn't really play like Ys, passively shoves its progenitor's mechanical identity to the side for a new one. But there's also value in that change of mechanical character. Suddenly any addition, any shakeup, is part of that port's unique identity. Maybe in a perfect world, ports would just function how they ought to and not stray. Why tinker with something that isn't broken, and why seize control of the original dev staff's vision? Why assume you can do it better? It's why remakes are so thoroughly questioned these days. Why staple the sort of general mechanical fluidity of MGS5 onto 3? Why actually remove tank controls from Resident Evil 4 aside from, well, modern gamers just don't really like that kind of thing. It's old and bad. Yeah, okay. But the Ys games were remade for actual years. TurboGrafx Ys 1 and 2 is often lauded as the best version of the games, and it is explicitly a remake, with revamped visuals and altered core mechanics. The duology was remade further, multiple times. This is also why I like to treat games as individual and unique artifacts these days, give them a little consideration beyond how I think the series ought to be and how the title ought to express itself. Because the original already exists, it's already established, it's not going anywhere, and it's how I end up leaving a little wiggle room for remakes and reimaginings, even when they totally bork it up.
Oh, is this ray tracing?
Maybe the most basic change beyond these absurd Fantasyland palette choices is the physical construction of the world. The game isn't nearly as tunnel-like as other versions and features several towns which connect to multiple other places. You can exit north from the first village and head in multiple directions, though admittedly some are gated early, whether by overall monster strength or physical barriers, but regardless, Ys 2 technically has an overworld instead of stages or segments. You can wander around, you can get that missing feeling of learning combat freely in open terrain. Ys 2 Special honors the game that kicked off the series, in a way the canon sequel doesn't. Many of the original spaces are expectedly pinched, narrow, more treacherous, and teeming with monsters. You still get the sense that dungeons are inherently more dangerous, that you're on their turf and not your own, and that shouldn't be underestimated. It's those little things that write the broader story of the play. Mechanically speaking, Ys 2 Special isn't unique for featuring tap-to-attack combat, but it was the first to break the ancient seal and plunge this world into chaos. Ys 2 Special has a lot to answer for, but this actually ends up working in the game's favor. Bump combat is still here. You can still line yourself up and strike down rows of dudes with ease. So why tap? It's mostly a matter of survival. The game moves fast, enemies are numerous, they close in and bear down, and you've got to weather the storm. Sometimes that means pushing back heroically, and other times it means taking a pile of damage because you're bad. Hitboxes are weird. You can't always be sure you'll survive. An adult can attack in what seems like a single frame. Enemies too. Stood ground means someone's going down. So when you're inevitably knocked low in the middle of a dungeon where you can't heal yourself, you start standing still, letting enemies filter towards you and swatting them like flies. And this is still risky, to a degree. If you let them slip by, if you time it badly, you will take damage regardless. It's not a perfect line of defense. So, Ys 2 Special has the original combat system, enough enemies with weird enough hitboxes to challenge it, and an entirely secondary type of combat stapled on that lets you play an imperfect but defensive game in case you get cornered on low HP. Ys 2 Special feels like no other Ys game, and that gives it an inherent worth and value. and not with subtraction, but addition. It's also worth noting that bump combat is very strong, but carries risk as well. You're functionally invincible if you're moving forward, bumping enemies. But if you move the stick away at all, you're instantly vulnerable and about to eat shit. You have to commit to your bump in a game where, genuinely, you can't be sure you'll kill your enemy before you have to move the stick. You can't be certain you're positioning perfectly.
But I know you. I know how you get down. You aren't gonna play this game.
I almost didn't play this game. You think you need a walkthrough for Solomon's Shrine?
If only you knew how bad things really were.
Ys 2 Special has more secrets than any other version of the game. You'd think they would have hidden treasure everywhere to reveal with light magic in the proper release, but they didn't. This version actually captures that missing vibe. In the first open field, you can stumble into a square that warps you to a sort of dream space with a warp tile to return. These are everywhere in the game, and they don't actually have a lot to offer. Not tangibly, it's a whole lot of small recovery items and more monsters to kill, but the fact that they exist at all, rewarded or otherwise, shows that somebody understood the assignment. Ys 2 just isn't all that magical, or at least it can feel like a letdown after the buildup of 1. Dwarves and elves are not enough. We need magical pocket dimensions. Now, Ys 2 Special has a lot of quirks, but some of them are completely absurd and unfindable without a guide. It's half the fun of the run. Every few pages your jaw drops. I never get that feeling anymore, man. Hell yeah. Oh, this is weird. The game has a different save system. I have to rest at an inn to save my progress. This sucks. Ys always lets you save in field. Okay, so, easy fix. What you're gonna want to do is head to the bottom left corner of town and exit through an imperceptible passage and fiddle around in the forest maze here until you exit north in front of a cave.
The cave's entrance here is invisible, by the way. Yippee!
Inside the cave, you'll have to duck some really strong monsters, but if you do, and get the chest at the end, you'll get God's Book, which will let you save anywhere, like normal, with no indication that it exists. Ys 2 Special casually locks an entirely expected and regular feature of Ys away from the player in a hidden dungeon. By the way, for anyone seriously trying to beat the game, this is not optional. You need this book because of the occasional crashes outlined in the walkthrough. Without it, you can lock yourself in a permanent progression trap. A whole swath of items exist in the game. Things you find in chests, things you can buy, which do nothing. They take up space. In case it wasn't clear, this game is unfinished. Some of them appear to be key items, but mechanically do nothing. I genuinely fear what this game could have been given 6 more months of dev time. Casinos exist in the game, but are not accessible, presumably because they were unfinished. Shit, there's magic shops, like, in every town, and you're sitting there, like, as a player thinking, okay, eventually I'll be able to buy magic spells or level them up. But no, they don't do anything. They're manned by NPCs, but they serve no apparent function. Again, likely because they're a remnant of an unfinished or scrapped version of the magic system, which ultimately became the typical magic system. Now, how about the best equipment in the game? You can find this just after the first dungeon. The trick is, you have to wander to a place you never have a reason to visit, find a specific tile, waltz into the secret dungeon, and climb a number of towers while high-level monsters threaten to slaughter you instantly. If you make it, you can nab the set, but you have to climb down, which might involve an amount of resetting or mechanical knowledge because enemies will ambush you as you're descending the stairs. Like, on the same tile. If you make it all the way out, you escape with equipment that never needs to be replaced. You could say, K-Bash, you're a bad man and you abused the best equipment for the whole game. To which I say, YOLO.
One day I'll die, and there's not a thing anyone can do to change that. Your words are but flecks of dust illuminated only by the dying of the light.
More than once you'll stumble across a weapon that's weaker than whatever you're holding and with no apparent benefits. A whole host of apparent key items simply do nothing in this game. They just take up space. Several characters give you an item that allow you to heal, like the heal ring in the first game, only they all have the same effect with no stacking or otherwise apparent benefit. You just get the heal ring a bunch of times. It's really kind of incredible. The game is as much a treasure trove as Ys was supposed to be, and sometimes on accident. Early in the game, actually after the first boss, your sword is shattered and you're left defenseless until you can equip another one. In most cases, the player will simply select the sword they found in the mines. It's weaker but viable. If the player avoids that chest for no good reason, they'll be able to equip nothing where Sada's sword originally was, and it'll re-equip with the same stats and everything as long as you don't remind the game that it was destroyed by deselecting it. I am obsessed with Ys 2 Special. So much of the game is a mystery, only known because one invested fan translated a Korean guide containing this information. Without it, people would never know that Ys 2 Special is the most divergent and most bizarre version of the game, except through word of mouth. And now I, a YouTuber, have played the game to completion and posted my opinion on the internet, so you don't have to have an opinion.
Wow. What a jump cut.
Because I can't read Korean and have no intention of attempting to compare the story beats with the original, because it's really not that important, I'm going to keep story discussion to a minimum, but there's actually a ton worth considering even on the surface. The game is effectively responding to the anime, one of the best versions of Ys 1 and 2 ever told, because it actually incorporates the bulk of the games, spruces things up, and creates drama and context in interesting new ways, and even manages to kind of translate Adol's bump combat into animation, aggressive forward strikes, clean kills. Ys 2 Special keys into some of the plot points the anime established. The townsfolk aren't helpful, and actively hinder Adol, or at least don't cooperate with him early on. I have to assume that they're suspicious of the Outlander and don't believe in a world beyond their floating rock, like in the anime, but again, I can't confirm. They accost you at the beginning, but unlike the anime, come around when you eventually heal Lilia. Still, it diverges heavily from any other version by incorporating elves and dwarves into the story, but these are passing, temporary cultures of no lasting plot value. They probably figured they belong in a generico version of Western fantasy land and stuck them in to help give a hub to the player in these sprawling environments without taking away from what was already established by Falcom. I shouldn't be flippant about all the additional characters. One of the elves here gets a whole little arc with Adol naturally because he's a magnet for strange women, and she ends up sacrificing herself to help Adol in a boss fight. Bro's really broken up about it. Damn. You hit a lot of the same locations, the mine, Noltia, burnedbless, but you also handle a lot of additional places like the fairy forest, the mountains. The world is so enormous and so connected by comparison, it feels like a totally different game. Is a totally different game. It's a kingly expanse. It genuinely sells the adventure vibe better, if only for its sheer size. You never interact with statues of the 6 priests here, by the way, and instead climb a series of towers, usually locked away in dungeons or remote areas, and these are mostly fine. What isn't fine is the Tower of Fact.
That's right. I said it. The Tower of Fact. The Tower of Fact. Kill me instantly!
Listen, I hate Darm Tower. I think Dark Fact is a weird guy. The team here seriously said, hey, what if Dark Fact's tower made players want to force quit their actual lives? It's completely unhinged. Every floor of the tower has 3 doors. If you enter the correct door, which you can't determine without walking through the door, you ascend. If you enter one of the wrong doors, you end up on the same floor. No problem. If you enter the other wrong door, the bad wrong door, that you can't distinguish from the other 2 doors, you warp back a couple of floors and have to start climbing from scratch. Monsters don't die permanently, by the way. Have fun. Now, to be fair, the game does record which doors you've previously entered, but it doesn't distinguish between them once opened, meaning you're gonna walk through the wrong door eventually when you forget which of the 3 on any given floor is the one correct door.
There are 50 floors.
Ys 2 Special's developers hate you and want you to suffer. Congrats on doing what no other version of Ys 2 could. Genuinely manifesting anguish in human beings how Darm wants. Actually accomplishing the villain's goals through design. Aspirational to a fault. Now, while most of the game is pretty harmless, the Tower of Fact, and random crashes notwithstanding, it's also built so big, so engorged and McLarge-huge that you'll eventually find yourself lost in any given dungeon. The mines, Noltia, burnedbless, all of them are labyrinths compared to the original unless you have a perfect memory. To say nothing of the tower with warp tiles that, jeez, get me out of here, man. But nothing really compares to Solomon Shrine. I want the address of the person who designed this space, because I have a few questions. If you thought Darm Tower was bad, if you thought Solomon Shrine was bad, man, if you thought the Tower of Fact was bad, let me personally introduce you to hell. This level is completely unhinged. It isn't technically any different than the original version. It's still a bunch of pavilions and stairwells and towers, but it's enormous! Like, unbelievably enormous, and it all looks exactly the same. It's so impossible to traverse, so easy to get lost. You absolutely need return magic, like to quit the dungeon and reset when you inevitably get lost. It was at this point I started to miss the cropped and restricted flow of regular Ys 2. At least they didn't trap me in the marble dimension until I used sorcery to free myself. Shit, I recommend either following the guide to the letter or drawing yourself a map. It is that bad. You will get lost here for hours. I cannot believe it ended up as is, uncut and unfiltered. This game is a fucking nightmare. Of course, this is still Ys 2, so in case you were worried, don't. You still have to grind an absolutely unholy number of enemies to keep competitive. To be clear, this happened in the original game, but it was much more rare because there were significantly fewer levels to reach in most versions. You either did less damage, good damage, or way too much damage. Ys 2 consistently keeps you at around par by forcing you to enter prepared. Ys 2 Special is a whole host of different bosses. Some they pulled over, some they invented, and some they reimagined. They're not really worth discussing in detail because the fundamental mechanics of the game are straight schwacked. Monsters can kill you in a blink because they attack so quickly, and bosses are just really big monsters, so you either steamroll them in a few hits because you're so strong, or you're getting slaughtered until you're ready to tango for real. Multiple bosses' minimum level requirements are seemingly arbitrary, unlike Ys 2 proper. You'll go from doing nothing to erasing them from history with a swing. It's kind of unhinged, and I do appreciate the visual variety. We go from serious monsters to this. This is monkey business, dude. Get the hell out of here, man. Take the game seriously. Speaking of bosses and honoring the original version of Ys 1, Ys 2 Special's bosses are the only regular set of bosses in the whole port ecosystem of Ys 2 that allow the player to kill them with regular combat. None of them necessitate magic. I barely used magic playing through Ys 2 Special. I understand this feature was developed explicitly for Ys 2. I just think it can be a drag on the mechanical excitement of the Ys franchise. And here's this bizarro port, handling things entirely regardless of the original material. The team doesn't seem to have been overly concerned with maintaining Ys brand identity, and I think it made something genuinely unique and interesting. I do think it's pretty funny that of all the things they chose to absolutely retain, the thing they considered essential to Ys 2 when recreating it in Ys 2 Special was level-gated bosses. The fuck is wrong with you? It's almost funny coming across a recognizable portion of the game. So much is twisted and altered, clearly built off the core, but expanded far out of control, like twisting tendrils. I think the sewers are the most faithful, all tucked away under a place that feels like it could house the entire population of my hometown. Now, grinding matters, but I found it pretty depressing that by endgame, I was about 8 to 10 levels under the minimum to fight Darm, just after Dallas. Yeah, so I found the fastest grinding spot was leaving Dallas's boss room, slashing a monster, leaving, and repeating for about 40 minutes. There's nothing to say. I can't believe this is a genuine computer game. Imagine the mental fortitude it takes to beat this shit, through the grinding, through the crashes, to finally finish the sequel to a video game that has no real, genuine, genetic progenitor. This is why America keeps losing at League of Legends. So Darm is funny. You need to use the forward movement trick to survive his laser, but he is manageable once you understand the core mechanics, which you should by this point. You've already taken more lives than the plague. It feels kind of triumphant to stand here in the final screens of Ys 2 Special. So few people have done this. So few people will ever do this, especially in North America. It's such a brutal, soul-sucking run, but such an adventure. Such a ridiculous, ridiculous adventure. It's like they managed to condense the spirit of Ys into their own version, and half of it was completely unintentional. Made a true artifact and housed it at the bottom of a cave. Look at these guys. Look at this dev team. You can't even hold them responsible because I can't read Korean. And yet I just know they're laughing at me. Ys 2 Special is frustrating and annoying and hard and cryptic and bizarre and confusing, and it's awful in a million ways. Nothing like it in the rest of the series. In consolidating the vision and seeking to create a definitive end for the duology, Ys 2 dampened the exploratory nature of its own port development. There will never be a second Sharp X68000 Ys. No follow-up, nothing. Famicom Ys 2 sanded away its edges, brought itself in line. Even Ys 2 has no extra material. It abandoned the treasures its own sudden chaotic birth created, let diamonds crystallize in its wake, but buried them deep. They did the same thing with Claria Ore in Universe. It's almost poetic. Even now, relics of the original Ys duology elude game historians and preservationists. Most of Falcom's early mobile titles, explicitly designed as cropped and thin versions of the PC and console games, are all but inaccessible, apparently requiring a compatible phone with the games preloaded, because they were distributed via online Japanese storefronts and eventually discontinued. And some of these date back to the early aughts. Most of them were never dumped. New Ys 1 3D is probably the worst loss because it would have slid right into the first video, but I had no means to play it myself, so better not to discuss it for its play. Thankfully, its sequel, not Ys 2 but Ancient Ys Vanished, The Truth, Adventure of Dogi, was recorded and exists on YouTube. That's right, the first playable appearance of Dogi, and we can't even play it. It's worth remembering that Falcom was booming at the time Ys launched, and that first game became a timeless classic, a mega hit. Following its success should have been practically impossible, but writing a conclusion was simple enough. They needed one. Falcom made a clear push into multiple markets, riding the success of Xanadu and Ys, among others. Their games were top sellers, all the rage, so they spread to multiple consoles, had manga produced, the Ys anime, full lines of merch. Falcom was more than games, it was becoming a multimedia brand. It's all kind of quaint to look back on, because people were genuinely becoming obsessed over burgeoning action RPG gameplay and, animated faces. Despite the attention I'm giving the various ports of Ys 2, this video is not about the same things as the original. That was a unique moment for the series. Many versions of a game with different stories to tell, at least through their mechanics and their visuals, and occasionally through core changes and additions, and these small visions of an unclear thing, at a time when it was manifesting, and the ways people talked about the game led to a series whose legacy is fueled by the oral tradition, something that by pure coincidence informs its story, the story of Care Ys, etc. With Ys 2's tighter scope, the real story of its many versions is how Falcom chose to close the book, how they wrote the end, how they dispelled mythology. And you can tell what they were going for by listening to the ways the various elements underpinning its construction speak. More characters, more faces, more life, means that the team knew it wasn't enough for Adol to be a red-haired swordsman adventuring at breakneck speed through wherever. Context makes the journey. Equipment, experience points, these things don't matter, don't even exist, without the pretenses of an economy, a lived-in world, a reason to get stronger and people to help. An adventure of this kind is nothing without an arc, and an arc is incomplete without personality. Adol doesn't have much personality, he's almost a player proxy, at least per the developer's own words, so they needed a living, breathing world to lend context to Adol's growth. But the player also has an arc. They rip through the demon hordes in the first game, and by the time they've landed on Ys, they need to understand the historical weight of the region and need to demonstrate growth to survive it. Adol can't only be a master swordsman who strikes out alone against impossible odds, he needs to keep learning, to continue adventuring. And so we get magic, which kneecaps the pre-established mechanical identity, but does so to make the player a learner, simultaneously above the challenges of the first game, of regular enemies, bump combat, but a total beginner against the real threats in Ys, simultaneously free to tear the demons apart, but made to stop and dig and work with the environment. You need to collect magic to advance, not stronger swords. Ys 2 is actually highly aspirational compared to the first. It just isn't always apparent playing through. It's where the game stumbles and where it finds its worth.
And for all my little critiques, all my design nitpicks, none of them really matter. Not in the grand march of history. What we're witnessing across Ys 1 and 2 are the critical steps necessary to birth the modern identity of Falcom.
I hope I've made it clear that while I don't enjoy the play of Ys 2 as much as the original, that play has narrative aspirations that serve the broader duology. It doesn't matter whether it's strictly better or whatever, people liked it. It caught like pox. Ys was already a fun game, especially for the era, so more of something similar was always bound to top charts. But the real success was in the story. It's not much, it's not some grand all-timer epic, but it was a PC-88 game. They were not producing Final Fantasy VIIs on that computer. It's why fidelity is still so fetishized today. Fidelity, more powerful tech, usually meant something. It's also interesting how Ys uses its mythological inspirations. Where once a city sank into the depths of a watery abyss for its people's greed, here a city rises into the sky for something similar. Claria gave Ys's people wealth and power over any other nation, but as a consequence, began summoning demons. While they buried the Claria, or silver ore, in the ground, the damage was done. And Darm, his minions, destabilized and overturned rule in Ys. There was no sudden ruin. Ys, the game, asks, what if things were reversed? If the city rose and there were no apocalyptic event, but a slow, terrifying decay, the rising tide of demons in the sky. Heavenly undertones and associations undercut with fear and evil. It subverts expectations, even if it isn't mind-blowing. And because of these simple flips, the stage is set for a player to walk in and do what they do best. Bring it back from the brink. Ys 2 imagines a much more hopeful world where, through its own slow decay, instead of its instant ruin, a hero is primed to swoop in, save the land, haul it back to the regular world. It isn't just lost for all eternity beneath the roiling waves. It's kind of a perfect video game story, even if the delivery is a little clumsy. Maybe it was outright essential for the many versions of Ys 2 to end the same way. Even Ys 2 Special's take is relatively safe, because it was the final chapter of a book, The End. I glossed over the lore during the walkthrough, but Ys 2, depending on the version, is pretty tight-lipped about its world. There's a sense that Ys, as a setting, even by the second game, is not fully established. What are you gonna do? Call a whole series Ys and leave Ys by the third game? Yes, and that's what happened. Maybe it's a reflection of the times. Ys 2 was never guaranteed a development cycle after the first game. It just happened to sell well enough to greenlight further installments. Why do any more work if it could be scrapped any time? But the result is a plot that feels kind of haphazardly thrown together. Meeting with the descendants of the priests who all give you some kind of help, but not too much. Dealing with bosses that seem like a big deal. But in what way beyond being giant monsters? Who is Darm exactly? A lot of the lore of Ys 1 and 2 is rewoven later in Ys Origin, which is part of why I'm downplaying the story. As it stands, it isn't accepted as the full version. These games lack the complete context that Falcom would eventually write into canon. What we do have is fairly loose, but we know at least that the Black Pearl is both the source of magic and demons in Ys. That Rhea and Fina seal themselves eternally, along with the Pearl, to contain it. And magic, at least in Ys, is no longer accessible. See, even they knew fireballs were dumb, but I appreciate the general attitude, because now it's a blank slate for adventure. Even when the story moves past the land of Ys, it's without the baggage and the magic, just a down-to-earth guy looking for something. And so we are all at all. And Ys moved on. The third game departed so thoroughly from established goals, and Falcom became so unstable that the entire series began to crumble after a few flickering moments of unity.
Hey, it's K-Bash. Huge thanks goes out to my $4 patrons. Check them out. Beautiful. And double special thanks goes to my extra generous patrons who are Adam Welch,
Air Pirate Sid,
AK,
Acropolis,
Alpha 42,
Ampersand,
Angel Rivera,
Anthony,
Aria,
Aaron,
Ashley, my wife, my darling. I asked K-Bash to make you smile. Also, hi, Merrick.
Azrael,
Azura,
Adicure,
Axinate,
Bear
Skeleton,
Basement Dweller,
Bosch 7,
BK, Do Crimes,
Bella, more like Smella,
Ben M,
Beguile,
Big Papa Spray,
Bite of Cursed Sushi,
Blake Against the Machine, Wargle Hargle.
Blossom Dante.
Boom Dead.
BH Operator.
Born in Shadow.
Brandon S.
Brandon Hesse.
British Gooch.
Cow.
Cajun Lady.
Cakesar.
C-Dub.
Casual Male XL.
Caesar T.
Chef Cow.
Hero Hero.
Chloric Fox.
Cordant.
Chris Bromo.
Cody Golden.
Comfy Moogle.
Commie Hog.
Couch Mode.
Cosmetic.
Crabmonger. Fish Finagler.
Crashgers.
Crater.
Crispy J.
Mono 19D.
Cup of the Puppa.
CW Glassworks.
Daggy Stag. Swaggy
David
Bag.
Castillo.
Dara.
Dash Granny.
Decode.
Deadward.
Dead. The Strega.
Dingus
Don't
Bat.
read this out loud. Oh no, he did
Doodle
it.
Floof. Doug Prince.
DJ. Professor K.
Dr. House from the critically acclaimed television show House MD.
Dr. Cullen, PhD.
Drop the bass.
Duffman.
The protagonist.
Dylan Winston.
El Jaguar.
Elfo.
Elpio.
Elsa.
Emperor Pickle.
Empty Tenchi.
Eric Monticello.
Excalibur Shine.
Exorian Hagen.
Gnar.
Fail Knight. American's just happy to be
Ferns
here.
Maximum.
Fuzillion.
Forte Noir. Frog Vorbis.
Frosty_gamer_.
Gandalf the Gate.
Garen Guaranteed.
Gigglebite.
Glasses Kohard.
Glyph Seeker.
Nine Cat.
Dobo Bobo.
Gobsmack.
Goose 6112.
Gregor 700.
Gray, the darkest black.
Garcory.
Gucci Plant.
Hatsune Miku's Crack House.
Archive.
Demon. Game and Station.
Hermit J.
Pixie. Hebe.
Honey Mutts.
Horn Tiger.
How do you know?
Huey.
just took 7 grams of magic mushrooms and now I'm lost in the woods.
I'm supporting K-Bash just because I wanted to make this part of the video longer. Inferno galore. Ingenious Clown. IOBG. I punched a sandwich.
It's not bad.
It's time to sue.
It's not good.
Ivy Ruth Langley. Jack Hydrick. Jacob. Jalopy. James. Jams. Jank Dankins. Jason Lasky. Jaden. James Vaughn.
Jar of Screaming Eyes.
Jay Drito. JL Savarus. Jay Deus. JP. JJ09. JK Hedgehog. John Bo the Joker. Jordan Joyner. Jorzy Burden. Juicy Frost. June. Justice David Mania. K-Chan. Keegan Too Cool. Keith the Thief. Key the Iron Idol. Kata Snack. King Kuma. Key. Janike Pike. Kitty Caddis. Clock. K-Noe. Cone 2020. Crated. Crazy Dark Chocolate. Cropaton. Kais. Kyle. None. Matt Kyle. KZ Excellent. Lady Weed. Lesson. Laundry Mom. Lego Sid. Lethal Nibbles. Linkle. Little Big Trouble. Loathsome Dung Eater. Lion Shark. Juan. Low Res. Low Fat Moger. Lucas Boyd. Blood Mac James. Lunati. Magic Meows. Malamatic Wolf. Manapool. Manic Pixie Space Pirate. Now Fever. Mara Ganger. Marcules. Marcus Rambles. Massive. Maxwell B. Maximum Dong. Meaty Smack. Mechanized Memories. Maple Puppet. Mega Boy E Nasty. Melly 10. Metal Gear Gaseous. Michelle Citrano. Migsy. Mike DeVio. Manadams. Mithras. Moa.
Bobby Dobby, Big Titty Gop, GF Cooey.
Monochrome Rainbow. Morgana Black. Maury. Mort. Modi.
Mr. Pee Pee Poo Poo Caca.
Mr. Yeety Dabface McYoink Bomb.
Myrna.
Naira New. Nito Torpedo. Neon Dwarf. Nick Krishna. Nifty Rex. Not Nobel. Nuggy. Okami. OJ McMuffins. Old Burgle. Old Man Cranberry. Ollie. Omni Nerd Zero.
137.
Only LK. The Plant. Oscar. Paperland. PBK. Pandemic Cowboy. Pelagic Undulation. PK Gaming. Mike. Popular Hitman. Prismatic Dan. Pringle Pringle. Probably not Grady. Project Darklight. Punch Fighter Champion. Ponosaurus Rex. Quasar McDougal. Quillworth. Raging Ataraxia. Real Beans. Reggie Rodriguez. Renteca Bond. Ringed Relay. Rowlet's Bowtie. Roylondo. RP Gamer. Ryan Michelle. Saigon Man. Salsa. Salty Smasher. Scribe Slendy. Sakai no Award. Sensual Coder. Saphirium. 7 Thumbs Up. Sexy Bionicle GF. Sergeant Shipwreck. Shot. Nintendo. Shut up, Leslie. Silver Bear 909. Sin. God! Sir Doodle's alive. Seriously tired of waiting in line. Sir Giggles XD. Sir Speedster. Skywardly. Sleepy Wabbit. Slippy Sloppy Bippy Boppy. Snart. Small Turtle House. So Zeta Dad. Sock'em Bopper. Suckdolager. Space Lizard. Sport. Spider Dad. Squidget. Star Night Sky. Streffin Battle. Super Dingus. Super Sandwich Guy. Taya Toxin. Shorn Chubbington. Terrence Swift. The artist formerly known as Sam the Sam. The Big Bubby. The Clown Prince of Cringe. The good Lord has blessed me. Hallelujah. The Green Loki. The Crispy Boy. The original Nars's Diet Thick Dew trademark Neo edition. The Peacemaker Pyro. The Salt Knight. The Nomad. The Real McCoy. The Toasted One. Big Dick Mystic. Thrash. Rips Heart. Tiggles McGuffin. Tim Lobster. Timid the Writer. Tony Jones. The Legend. Total Play. Travis Edwards. Tropical Avera. Twiddle Chungus. Tie Guy 9001. Unlawful Skies. Crippling Gotcha Addiction. Vid. Vacant Plaza. Valenris. Venom. Vice Pup. Viewers like you. Vic. Volkendo. Joaquin, get right in my bag. Waposa. Wayne is Boss. Weed Trash. Waylon. Where am I? Help. Whiskey Dono. Widgie. Winter Solstice. Win TV. Wrenchim. Zanny Tanner. Sean D. Shravius. Your boy Flyers. Yero 12. Yashichi. Yay Kundo. Zachary Livesey. Zachary D. Zanasso. Zane the Impure. Zane the Pure. Zed Slayer Gamer. Zephikamon Full Burner. Zero Salazar. Z-Nova. Cyberbunk. If you'd like to help support the show, unlock new long-form projects, and help me keep improving, check out my Patreon. We got lots more videos in store. Stay tuned for more. K-Bash out.